Verdant Steel is going to shake up the meta quite a lot in Evolve, and you guys really need to know what these decks do, whether you're planning to use them or not. In this video, I'll give you a detailed rundown on each of the Natura and Machina decks supported in this set, together with one of the other decks that doesn't fit those archetypes as well. And unlike usual, I will also be giving you examples of how to play the decks and just kind of what you want to look out for, because I actually had my area championship qualifier during this meta in Japan last year, and while I didn't have as much time to prepare for it as I did in the Idolmaster meta, I think that a lot of these decks are a lot more technical than previous sets, and honestly I got to know how to use them through reading articles and really studying everything that a lot of the pro Japanese players are outputting. And while I can't necessarily offer that level of knowledge for all of these decks, I'll do my best to provide at least the bare basics of what you should know. We start off with Forestcraft, and this will be the only class that we feature two different decks for, but the first one of which is going to be Lidica Natura Forest.
I'm here for you.
This is my biggest regret actually, because when this set was out in Japan, I didn't actually play Natura Forest that much, but now I actually play it quite a lot after I got support in the most recent set here in Japan. I also only learned how to play Lidica in the app version very late into the app version's lifespan, so I didn't know I would enjoy Lidica's game plan so much, so let me share what I've learned in recent times. The key card of this deck is Lidica the Stone Claw.
Lol.
Lidica is a 4-cost 5/5 that says whenever a Nataran Great Tree is put onto your field, you recover 1 play point. And she can evolve for 1 play point, but this can only be used if you've played at least 5 cards this turn. So the idea is that you're going to play a bunch of Nataran Great Trees in the same turn that you play her to refund all those play points and go towards the 5-cost or 5 combo for that turn, and then you'll be able to evolve her.
Oof. This sucks, but somebody's gotta do it.
Nataran Great Trees will be brought up a lot in this video, so just so you know, it is a 1-cost amulet that says whenever this would leave the field, you draw a card and discard a card. And you can also pay 1 play point to just bury it on its own, and that way you can just immediately proc that effect too. Generally speaking, whenever you have effects that clash, depending on, for example, when you have a Nataran Great Tree resolving and something else resolving, you should always resolve, in my opinion, the Nataran Great Tree effect first to draw cards and discard cards, so you know what other plays you can make that turn before committing to other effects, because that way you know what options you're going to be exploring going forward after you resolve that effect. It's a technical little thing, but it's a tip that I really want you to keep in mind as you play these decks. And then when Lidica does evolve, she becomes a 6/6 with Storm that then also still recovers you 1 play point every time you play a tree. So her being a 6/6 Storm for basically 5 cost is pretty good, but she does need you to prep a lot of those trees beforehand. And optimally, she also wants you to prepare her key spell, which is Send 'em Packin'. Send 'em Packin' is a 0-cost spell, the first of its kind I believe, that has the Natura and Beast trait that allows you to select your Lidica on your field and give it +1/+1, and on combo 5, you also get to deal damage equal to its attack to all of your opponent's followers. So this means that you're basically getting a 6 damage AoE to your opponent's entire board. And if you have 2 of these, you can technically resolve it twice, which basically will clear virtually everything. But now in order to supply those trees, we're going to need a bunch of other cards to help that out. So typically on turn 1, you're going to play a neutral card, Colorful Cook, who is a 1-cost 1/2 that on fanfare puts a Nataran Great Tree token onto your field or EX area, and also heals your leader 1. On Last Word, she lets you discard a Natura card to draw a card, so that allows you to cycle through your deck and find your Lidica or your Send 'em Packing much easier. Whether you put the Nataran Great Tree on turn 1 to the front or the EX area will of course determine how the game goes. I'd say in this expansion, you want to mostly just put it to the EX area without necessarily thinking about it too much, but in future expansions, there will be metas where you want to put it to the front more. Your other turn 1 play will be Forest Hermit, which is a 1-cost 1/1 that also puts a Nataran Great Tree token, but this one is only into EX area. He does have other uses past turn 1 though, because if you evolve him, he becomes a 2/2 that selects a Natura card in your cemetery and adds it to your hand. This means that, for example, if you went into your Lidica and you use Send 'em Packing, and then you know, obviously you probably won't win on the first turn that you do that, but you want to do it again next turn, well then next turn you can go into Hermit, evolve it, get the Lidica or the Send 'em Packing back to your hand, and prepare for another combo for Lidica. On turn 2, you have a lot of other good plays. You have Avatar of Fruition, which is a 2-cost 3/2 that puts a Great Tree into your EX area, and as long as the Avatar is on your field, any tree that you would play costs 1 less, so it becomes a 0-cost, which pairs really well with Lidica, turning all your trees into 0-cost, which means that every time you play a tree while Lidica's on board, you're actually getting play points back. So on something like turn 6, that combines pretty well because you can play Lidica, you can play Avatar, and then you're going to just put trees out basically for free, regain a bunch of play points, and now you're able to play other cards as well. Another turn 2 play is Desert Pathfinder, a 2-cost 2/3. This one's a neutral, so he's used in every single Natura deck, but he puts a tree into your field or EX area, and then if you have at least 5 Natura cards on your field and or in your EX area combined, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, you find a Natura card from among them added to your hand, and the rest goes to the bottom. He's really strong because on turn 2 you can generate just a tree and just have a body on board. It's a 2/3, so it's a bit harder to get rid of too, but it also activates itself as a searcher at the same time, so it helps you find your pieces. The last turn 2 option for this deck is Ghastly Treant, which is a 2-cost 2/3 that also puts a tree into EX area on Fanfare, but this is by far one of the best effects in the deck that really puts this deck up against a lot of the aggro decks, which is you banish a tree from your field to heal your leader 3 once per turn. This is really powerful because across the game you're going to be using this card a bunch, and as you saw already, we have ways to recur Natura cards too, so this is the only time when you would want to play a tree to the front, for example, from something like the Colorful Cook. But oftentimes, because Lidica needs you to play a bunch of trees to the front anyway, you're gonna essentially just need to clear them away somehow. So sometimes the turn before you play Lidica, you can play the Ghastly Treant, and then if it sticks, the next turn you're gonna be able to clear out the trees on your board because you need to open up space for Lidica anyway, because she needs you to play a lot of trees that turn, and so that way it has another use as well. And don't forget that every time you clear a tree off your board, whether it's through its own effect or whether it's through Ghastly Treant, you are drawing and discarding cards every single time. This is why Trail of Light is a must-have staple for all of these Natura decks. I think I told you guys basically like almost 2 years ago now. But Trail of Light procs when it's discarded from hand to draw a card, which means that every time your Natura Great Tree basically goes away from board, you're able to proc it because you draw a card, discard Trail of Light, and then draw a card again. So you're actually not losing cards from hand, you're gaining cards. Typically, Lidica gets played on turn 5 for the most part because you need that 1 extra play point in order to just kind of go through all of your trees. Even if you're going second and have the evolve point, I mean, you don't really have the, you play the 4 play points, then unless you had a avatar stick, it's kind of hard to put out more trees to regain those play points. So on things like turn 3 and 4, we oftentimes play Blossom Spirit. She puts a tree or fairy token into your EX area and she evolves for 1, and on evolve, she lets you deal 2 damage to an enemy follower, but if you have at least 3 cards in your EX area, which are usually going to be trees, you can deal 4 instead. She also sports 3/4 in stats, so she's actually a very good stat stick into a lot of these decks right now in the meta. So she definitely helps you just sustain yourself a little bit because you have a bunch of healing from the Treant, you have a bit of damage from her while you build up your EX area and prepare for your Lidica combo turns. But then you're thinking, okay, so I did my Lidica combo, I dealt them like 7 or 6 damage to face, and so now what, right? How do I finish off the game? What do I do after turn 5? Well, one option that Forest has enjoyed employing for quite some time is Cassiopeia. She's a 5-cost 4/4 that deals damage to your enemy followers equal to the amount of cards between your hand and EX area combined. So this way you can basically just take out your opponent's board while you're building up resources and rebuilding your EX area full of trees. Your other option is Cetus the Beastblade, which is also from this expansion, which is a 3/5 5-cost with ward that heals your leader 4 at the start of your end phase, and if you played something from your cemetery this turn, he becomes a 5/7. He can also evolve in order to revive your 3-cost or less follower from your cemetery. So this means you can get back your Treant, which means in 1 turn you're healing 7. Apart from that, you're basically just trying to chip away your opponent's life bit by bit in the early turns, and then make sure that you basically do the Lidica combo twice, and then usually, I mean, that's another 14 damage. So 14 damage from the Lidica plus 6 from somewhere throughout the game is usually going to seal the deal, but don't forget a lot of decks in this meta will have a bunch of healing too. But if that's not enough, we also have Primal Giant, a 9-cost 7/7 that when discarded from hand, puts a tree into your EX area, which is really good because it's another good discard candidate for a lot of your tree effects. But don't discard too many of him because he has more effects than just that. When you would play this, you can bury 4 of your Natura cards in order to make him cost 5 as a 7/7, and then on Fanfare, he will select a Forestcraft follower that costs 5 or less in your cemetery and summon it. So of course it does mean that you can revive your Lidica and then immediately go into the combo, or if you need board clear, you can revive Cassiopeia. If you need sustain, you can revive the Cetus. Just keep in mind it's only Forestcraft followers. Another important thing to keep in mind is that when you bury your 4 Natura cards for the reduction costs, that if you bury a bunch of trees, I highly recommend to resolve all the trees first before you choose a target for which Forestcraft follower you want to revive. This way you can also just ditch some of the cards that you might want to revive from the tree effects too. Finally, a staple that you're going to see in a lot of these Natura decks in this expansion is Viridia Magna. She's a neutral 4-cost 0/4 with the Natura and deity traits that has Rush, Assail, and Bane, and on last words, she will pop a tree from your field or EX, which is very important, in order to put herself back on the field as an engaged follower and evolve herself, and if you didn't manage to evolve her, then she banishes herself. We only want one of the evolve copies in this list, but her evolve version is a 4/4 with ward that on last words heals your leader too. This is also one of the annoying things when playing the Latica mirror or when playing against other Natura decks as Latica, because if you play your Send 'em Packing while your opponent has an unevolved Viridian Magna in play, they can then revive her, evolve her with the ward, and now you're basically your Latica cannot go face anymore unless you play another Send 'em Packing or you have other followers that can go into the Viridian Magna, but then you're also giving them back 2 defense, so it's a little bit annoying. So sometimes they will just leave up an unengaged Viridian Magna just to kind of like bait out your Send 'em Packing, so sometimes you have to just not use the Send 'em Packing and accept that they will swing the Viridian Magna into your Latica next turn. Usually this deck just basically wants to play Cook turn 1 and then either Avatar or Pathfinder in turn 2. Turn 3 you're often going to look at something like Blossom Spirit or like Tree Ant plus a tree and then do some healing. Just make sure to balance your trees because on the turn you go into the Latica you need to have 3 trees. So generally speaking what you're going to do on turn 5 is you're going to play Latica, then you're going to go tree, 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 that's your 4th card of the turn, and then Send 'em Packing for the 5th. And then because the last tree gave you back a play point, you are able to have the 1 play point to evolve her, and now she's a 7/7 swinging face on turn 5 whether you go first or second. It's a bit of a long explanation, but a lot of these decks do require a bit of explaining to do, so I hope this helped. The other Forestcraft deck I want to quickly feature is of course Amataz. Not going to take as long on this one because this deck has been around in the meta for quite some time. It's basically Amataz as you know it with the addition of Anastasia, which was already an addition in the last expansion, but the big new addition is Cynthia the Queen's Blade.
This evergreen sword will cut through their ranks!
A 6-cost 4/6 with the elf trait that on fanfare puts a fairy wisp token into your EX area and gives each pixie token on your field +2 attack. And as long as she's on the field, each pixie token on your field has both storm and assail. And what's good is that not only does she give your pixie tokens +2 attack on fanfare, but whenever you would put a pixie token from your EX to your field, for example, she will also give it +2 attack and also apply the storm and assail. So this is really nice because until now you've had to basically charge up your EX area and set up all of your fairies and your wisps for the Amataz turns, but now even after the Amataz turns you still have really strong lethal damage from Cynthia on turn 6 and onwards. I'm not going to go through a whole explanation of how to play Amataz, I'm sure a lot of you already know how to play it from before. The other new card in this list is basically Blossom Spirit that we went over earlier, because she can also generate fairy tokens, not just natural and great trees, and her damage buff works with whatever is in your EX area, so even if it's just a bunch of wisps and fairies that will also proc. So I hope this has been helpful to you forest players because I think this is the most detailed forest part I've ever had in one of these videos. Moving on to Sword, this is the deck that I played the most in this meta. Maybe I regret it a little bit just because I think this deck really needs a lot of time in order to dedicate to it, in order to really get good with it. And I was very busy last year at this time of year, and surprisingly, or not so surprisingly, I'm also very busy at this time of year, and that's why this video is a little bit late. But let's talk about Natura Sword. You're going to start to see some familiar faces as we go through these decks. Colorful Cook, Desert Pathfinder, Trail of Light, Viridian Magna, basically a staple in every single Natura deck. However, this deck has 2 key cards that I want to go over first and foremost. The first one of which is Balion Sovereign Light.
Know the fury of the forest!
A 3-cost 3/3 Natura Commander Beast trait, and fair puts a Natura and Great Tree token onto your field or your EX area. So the forest ones all just put stuff to your EX. The sword ones let you choose between field and EX, much like the neutral ones. And then Balion can evolve for 1.
The forest, illuminated by my blade!
So turn 3 going second, this is pretty good. And on evolve, he looks at the top 4 of your deck, finds 2 Natura cards from among them, puts them to your EX area, and the rest goes to the bottom. And he has the not once per turn activatable effect that lets you banish 2 trees from your field to select a Natura follower on your field and give it +2 attack, not once per turn. So this is very powerful because the top 4 search for basically virtually anything you find is very strong, and it also buffs up anything that was on the field before and after it too. This also pairs really well with his own spell, which is King's Might. Originally a 3-cost spell that has the Natura trait that selects an enemy follower on the field and deals it 4 damage, but when you would play this, you can engage 2 trees in order to make it cost 1, and if you have Balion on board, then it costs even 1 less, so it becomes a 0 cost if you fulfill both of those conditions. So that's already very good, because if you find this and you have 2 trees already on board, then that means you can play the spell for 0 and then use Balion's effect to remove the 2 engaged trees, buff up Balion himself or any of your other Natura followers, and then resolve evolve the 2 tree effects in order to draw cards and discard cards at the same time. The other important key card for this class is Mistelina.
You would be wise not to underestimate me.
Mistelina Forest Princess is a 6-cost 4/6 with the Natura Commander and Princess traits that has Storm, and if you engage 2 cards that are named Natura Great Tree on your field, she gets +3 attack and heals your leader 2 defense. This effect is not once per turn, by the way, so if you have 4 trees on board, you can use it twice. She also on Fanfare selects a Princess's Strike in your cemetery and plays it for 0 play points. Princess's Strike is a 1-cost spell that has a quick effect to select an enemy follower on the field and deal it 2 damage, but if Mistelina is on board, then you deal 6 damage instead. This is really huge because in the early turns, it's basically just an angelic snipe, which is very good because it has a Natura trait and can be searched, but on turn 6, this will take out virtually the biggest of wards. So even Viridia Magna, for example, if they have like the evolved body on board, then they can be taken out with this too. Balion and Mistelina combine really well together because, for example, if you have an evolved Balion on board and you'd play Mistelina, you can use Mistelina's effect to engage 2 trees, buff herself up, then Balion removes those 2 trees to draw cards, discard cards, and also add more attack to the Mistelina. And then if you have ways to generate more trees, if you still have play points, then you can continue generating trees, continue using Mistelina's effect to engage them, heal yourself while buffing herself, and then Balion will continue to also recycle them and buff up the Mistelina. I've definitely attacked with some crazy attack power with Mistelina in the past, so you can definitely take this very far. There's quite a few ways to generate those trees. We already talked about Colorful Cook beforehand, but you also have Tempered Ether, which puts a Natura Great Tree token into your field and your EX area. So you get 1 on board, 1 in EX, and so you can play the 1 from EX out, and then now you have 2. You have Desert Pathfinder that we talked about before, and then of course Lupine Axeman is a 2-cost 2/3 that puts a tree onto your field or EX, and also engages itself at any number of trees on your field to choose an enemy follower and deal it damage equal to the number of trees that you engaged for this effect. Lupine Axeman is pretty good because on turn 2 you can play this. If you have 2 trees on board, it'll take out anything that has 2 defense, and then if you're going second, next turn you can just Balion evolve and then buff up the Lupine Axeman, and it swings for 4 into your opponent's face, which is pretty good. That is one of the really strong ways to use Balion, by the way, is that usually you want to play like turn 1 Colorful Cook, turn 2 Pathfinder or Lupine Axeman, and then turn 3 Balion going second, evolve it, buff up something that was there before, and you can just sometimes win off of that aggro alone. If that's not enough, you have Swift Tigress, who's a 4/3/3 cost that on Fanfare lets you engage a tree in order to get Storm. So she is a 4 Storm as well, which can be combined with Balion to turn her into a 6 Storm. The deck does have a lot of healing as well, thanks to Mistelina and Viridia Magna's evolved body as well, and you have plenty of ways to damage your opponent's followers thanks to things like Lupine Axeman as well as the Leod that is also in this set. And Leod, by the way, will be used in like virtually every single sword deck to ever come out going forward. Even 1 year later, still continues to be used in every single sword deck. So pick it up even if you're not playing Natura, but you still plan to play sword. He's a 2-cost 1/3 that as long as he's reserved, he has Intimidate and Aura, which means he cannot be attacked into, he cannot be targeted by spells or effects. Basically, he's immune to everything except for AoE damage. And at the start of your end phase, you choose an enemy follower on the field and deal it 1 damage. If he evolves though, he becomes a 2/4 that deals 2 damage on evolve to either one of your opponent's followers or their leader, and he keeps his 1 damage ping at the end of every turn and his Intimidate and his Aura, but now on a 2/4 body. So he's very annoying to take out, but generally speaking, the pattern of this deck is you're going to be going turn 1 Colorful Cook, turn 2 you're either going to Pathfinder or Lupine Axeman, Leod in some matchups, or Maid Leader to search out your Balion if you don't already have one, and then turn 3 going second will be a Balion, otherwise it'll be turn 4 going first, and then you really want to just make sure you have Natura followers on board when you Balion so that you can buff them up and just kind of swing in with aggro. Otherwise, you're farming resources into your Mistelina turns and then just basically swinging at them. I mean, Mistelina on her own is a 7/6 Storm that only gets stronger paired with Balion or paired with multiple trees on board, and you're sustaining yourself and fighting the board together with things like Viridia Magna, and sometimes stealing your opponent's cards thanks to Octress. This deck is very complex though, because every single time that you discard something for the Natura Great Trees, you have to think, will I need this card later? I think that's where Latica is a little bit easier because you have more ways to get stuff back, especially after set 12, that gets even easier. But Sword is a lot harder because it doesn't really have that kind of recursion. A lot of the cards that you discard in Sword will be gone forever, so if you don't know what you're discarding and you don't know what you should prioritize for late game, you will make misplays and you lose just because of a card you discarded on turn 1 or 2. So always keep that in mind. I think this deck is by far the least forgiving to misplays, so if you're planning to use this in the upcoming BCS tournament or just even in your locals, please do make sure to put in a lot of time into it. I feel like I put in a fair bit of time into this deck last year, and even then I did really poorly in the tournament that I played this in. So honestly, I kind of wish I used a different deck. So don't be like me. Prepare enough or choose a different deck. We're gonna knock out the Naturas first and skip the usual class order that I do these in and go to Dragon first. Natura Dragon is quite different from the last two Natura decks because this one isn't so much board based. It doesn't care so much about like setting up your trees for something. It's more so using those trees as cost and bait. The key card this time is Verdant Cursed Shadow.
You cannot escape the shadow.
A 4-cost 4/4 that evolves for 2 or for 0 if you have 10 or more Natura cards in your cemetery. And on Fanfare, looks at the top 3 cards of your deck, puts 1 Natura card from among them to your hand, and buries the rest, so that helps to contribute to the 10 cards in your cemetery. When he does evolve,
I do struggle to restrain myself.
he lets you choose one of the following effects. The first one allows you to deal 4 damage to an enemy follower and then search your deck for a Shadow's Corrosion and put it to your EX area. His other effect lets you choose a Shadow's Corrosion in your cemetery and play it for 0 instead. Shadow's Corrosion will be a very familiar sight to people that play the app version of the game. It's a 3-cost spell that when played selects enemy follower in the field, deals it 4 damage, and if you have Verdant on your field, puts it to the EX. Once it's in the EX, it's stuck there forever because it cannot be played from the EX. And at the start of your end phase, as long as this is in the EX, you deal 1 damage to each enemy leader for every 5 Natura cards in your cemetery. So this means that at the end of every turn, once you have like 10, this is doing 2 damage every single turn. If you have 15, it's 3, if you have 20, it's 4, etc. And there's nothing that says you can only have 1 of these in your EX. If you set up 2 or 3 of them, even with just 10 cards in cemetery, you're doing 4 or 6 damage a turn. So of course, I know what you're thinking, this pairs really well with Dragomancer's Rites. If you need a reminder, Dragomancer's Rites is an amulet from set 2 that at the start of your end phase, as long as you discarded a card this turn, it selects enemy leader or follower on the field and deals it 2 damage. And because you're discarding cards for the tree effect every single time, you are definitely discarding cards every single turn. So this deck's goal is very much to generate trees and get rid of them as fast as possible. For the generators, we have the usual Colorful Cook and Desert Pathfinder. We also have Feral Ether, which summons a tree token onto your field, and if you have Overflow active, so if you are in 7 or more play points, summons up to 3 instead. Lightning Velociraptor is a 2-cost 3/2 that summons a tree, and if Overflow is active, it summons 2 instead and gives this follower rush, so that way you can also clear itself off the board to make space for more trees too. The best way to clear off your trees though is through the Whirlwind Pteranodon. On Fanfare, it banishes a tree from your field to boost your play points by 1, and if it's taken out, it just summons back a tree just like in the app. So this way you get a way to ramp to get to Overflow faster and also to get to the 6 play points necessary to evolve your Verdant for the first time, because getting to 10 Naturas in Cemetery before you get to 6 play points isn't as fast and likely as you think. Another very useful card is the Wildfire Tyrannosaur, which is an 8-cost 6/6 that whenever you discard it from hand, you can pay 1 play point to deal 3 damage to an enemy follower. If you do play it for the 8 cost, it will banish a tree from your field to deal 3 damage to each enemy follower in the field. Not once per turn, by the way, so you can do this as much as you want. So as you can see, this deck has a lot less to do in the early game. We're basically playing a bunch of these tree generators and not really doing too much with them. We're hoping to ramp, and we're hoping to play Dragomancer's Rites pretty early too, because that gives us ways to deal with the opponent's board and life if necessary. And one card that sees an interesting inclusion is the Extreme Carrot, a 2-cost 2/2 with Rush that every time it is destroyed on last words, you can pay 1 and banish a tree from your field or EX to search your deck for a carrot, summon it, and shuffle your deck and heal your leader by 1. So this deck is a lot less aggressive. It doesn't have as much like buffing or like big damage plays throughout the early or mid game, but instead you are just generating trees, trying to discard as much as possible, and just basically fill up that cemetery of Natura cards so that your Verdant evolves for free and so that your Corrosion deals as much damage as possible. As long as you survive your opponent's early game, as long as the game goes past the mid game, you're likely to have already won, because a lot of decks will not be healing enough no matter how much they try to deal with all the burning you're doing. And sure, you might be the one to deck out first, but it's highly likely your opponent will get burned before they manage to win. You also have some good top end in this deck, such as Ogre Cap to deal that last bit of damage, Shenlong for that last little bit of healing, healing, and so overall it's a very powerful deck, but definitely the slower of the three, and definitely also the one that you have to practice against the more aggressive matchups from these three as well. Alright, we've taken up all this time just talking about the Natura decks. There's really a lot to go over here. Let's move on to Machina. We begin with Machina Rune first and foremost, which combines one of our protagonists with the antagonist in the same deck. The protagonist, of course, being Tetra, Sapphire Rebel.
I will never lose heart.
The 3-cost 3/3 that on fanfare puts a repair mode token into your EX area. The repair mode tokens are basically quick spells that give your leader +1 defense and have the Machina trait. When you evolve Tetra though,
If it has come to this, I will fight.
she does say that as long as she's on the field, any Machina card you would play from the EX area will cost 1 less. This doesn't mean just during your turn, by the way. As long as she's in play, also during your opponent's turn, this also applies. And then up to 4 times per turn, not just on your own turn, also on your opponent's turn, whenever you play a Machina card, she selects an enemy follower on the field and deals it 1 damage. So you can already think about that, right? You put a bunch of repair modes into your EX area, you play them for 0 to heal yourself 1, and she pings 1 to your opponent's followers 4 times a turn. So if your opponent's trying to like go for lethal, and Tetra's on board, they're gonna really think twice because they don't know how much damage is gonna come at them. 1 less cost only comes from when you play a card from EX area, but if you leave some play points up, you can also threaten some things from hand too. So then you're thinking, okay, how are we getting, that many repair modes in the EX area? Well, Machina also has some good neutral tools such as Mechagun Wielder, a 1-cost 1/2 that puts an assembly droid or repair mode token into your EX area, and on last words discards a Machina card to draw a card, much like the Cook does as well. The assembly droid token is a different one. You will sometimes play it in this deck too, but it's basically a 1-cost 1/1 with a Machina trait that does have an effect this time, unlike the app, to engage yourself and bury 3 of your Machina followers to select an enemy follower in the field and deal it 5 damage. Sometimes you do need that 5 damage, not so much in this deck, but it does come up. The other 1-drop you have is Prototype Warrior, which is a 1-cost 2/1 that can either put an assembly droid into your EX area, or if you have already 3 Machina cards in your EX, it can get +1/+1 and Rush, becoming a 3/2 with Rush for only 1 cost. Delta Cannon is basically another Angelic Snipe, but it has a bonus effect that whenever your Tetra is put into the field and this is in the cemetery, you can pay 1 to put it into your EX area. So that also provides you with a 0-cost card in the EX area when Tetra's on the field that technically deals 3 damage combined with Tetra. Much like how the Natura decks have their ethers, the Machina decks have their own cores. The Sagacious Core for Runecraft is a 1-cost amulet with a Machina trait that looks at the top 2 cards of your deck, puts a Machina card from among them to your hand, and the rest at the bottom of your deck. And then you can engage and bury this card as long as you have 3 Machina cards in your EX area to deal 1 damage to each enemy leader. So as you can see, a lot of the 1-drops are basically either generating stuff in the EX area or searching out stuff into your hand. For the 2-drops, one of the generic ones is Robo Goblin, a 2-cost 2/2 that on last words puts a repair mode token into your EX area, but if you evolve it for 1, it becomes a 3/3 that summons an assembly droid. What's really good is that even if it gets taken out, it does generate that repair mode, so that is very good in combination with Tetra. The other 2-drops are Mechanized Lifeform, which is a 2-cost 3/1 that puts a repair mode token to EX area on fanfare, and once per turn whenever you play a Machina, it draws a card. So even if you choose to use that repair mode early, that does help you dig for other pieces. Megastaff Sorcerer is a 2-cost 2/2 that also generates a repair mode or assembly droid to your EX area, and its other effect lets you engage itself and banish a Machina card from your EX in order to choose an enemy follower and deal it damage equal to how many Machina cards are in your EX. On turn 2, you're usually just using this for the generation because you don't want to banish your stuff too early because you want to build stuff up for your Tetra turn, but in later turns, especially on turn 7, you're going to want to use that second effect a lot more. And then on turn 3, of course, going second, you might just go into the Tetra already, but going first, you might want to use something like Displacer Bot, which is a 3-cost 3/2 that on fanfare looks at the top 4, finds a Machina card, puts it to EX from among them, and puts the rest at the bottom. If you play it on later turns, you can then evolve it for 2, which then turns it into a ward with 4/3 in stats that on evolve lets you choose an enemy follower and deal a damage equal to 2 times the number of Machina cards in your EX area. So if you have 2, this is 4, if you have 3, this is 6, etc. The generic option on turn 3 is Mecha Wing Angel, which is a ward that on fanfare puts an assembly droid or repair mode into your EX area and lets you engage itself to deal 4 damage to the enemy follower as long as you have 5 Machina cards in your cemetery. This is both easy and hard in this deck, I guess, because you are mostly the spells you're playing are tokens, so they don't go to the cemetery. But even then, as a 3-cost 3/3 with ward that generates a token, this is still a very good card. But I know what you're thinking, right? We're generating all these tokens and we're just using them to deal damage. Like, how are we actually winning the game? That is where the villain of the deck comes in, and not just the deck, but this whole story arc actually. Belphomet, Lord of Iolon.
Looks like I've got to terminate you pests myself.
7 cost 5/5 with Rush that on Fanfare looks at the top 5 cards of your deck. From among them, lets you summon any number of Machina followers that cost a total of 6 or less and put the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. And at the start of your end phase, it gives each other Machina follower on your field +1/+1 in stats, so this doesn't include himself. What this means is that you can, from the top 5, summon a 3 cost, a 2 cost, and a 1 cost. You can summon a 3 cost and a 3 cost. You can summon a 6 cost and nothing else. You can summon a 3 and a 3. You can summon a 3 and a 1 and a 1 and a 1, so there's definitely a lot of ways to combine this. So, for example, turn 7, we play Baphomet, we look at the top 5, we summon Tetra, we summon Prototype Warrior, and we also summon Mechanized Lifeform, for example. And if you have, you know, an evolve point from going second, you can evolve the Tetra to now make anything that went to your EX area cost 1 less to play. So then the Mechanized Lifeform will generate a repair mode, you can immediately just use it in order to then play it. Tetra deals an extra damage, Mechanized Lifeform will draw an extra card. Prototype Warrior also saw that if you do have 3 cards in the EX, it also is a 3/2 with Rush that will now get even bigger. And any of the assembly droids that you generated as well can now be played for 0 thanks to Tetra. And don't forget that even when you summon the assembly droids, Tetra's effect will also proc because she cares about Machina cards being played, not spells. So she will still be dealing 1 damage. So it's quite easy to set up a full field of 5 for Baphomet to apply the buff, and making it pretty easy just like Snowball if you just play Baphomet twice basically. And sometimes you will just choose Techno Lord as a 6 cost 6/6 with Machina. This is the Veridia Magna of the Machina trait. On Fanfare, allowing you to choose 3 Machina cards from your cemetery and banish them to choose 2 of its 4 effects. The first one destroys an enemy follower, the second one destroys an enemy amulet, the third one deals 3 damage to an enemy leader, or each enemy leader if you're playing Glory Finder, and the fourth one lets you search your deck for any Machina card that isn't Techno Lord and add it to your hand. This is really good because sometimes you'll be missing the Baphomet, so just turn 6 you just hard play this, search Baphomet, turn 7 play the Baphomet. And what's good is that while searching stuff, it will also destroy something or deal damage, whichever you need. Sometimes you just need that extra 3 damage, and don't forget that because this is a Machina card, this will also proc any other damage effects you might have. So for example, you have Tetra on board, you play Techno Lord deals 3 damage to the enemy's face, but then Tetra sees that and it's like, oh, your opponent has a 1 defense follower, well, poop, Tetra has 1 damage, we'll take that out. So overall, this deck is a lot less combo oriented the way the decks have been so far until now. It's a lot more about responding to the opponent, but it's also really strong because it can, you know, a lot of the strong attackers don't have aura in this format. So Latika doesn't have aura, Mistelina doesn't have aura. So if you save up enough Delta Cannons, you can just pew 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 or just take them out, and then you don't have to worry too much about their damage, and you can focus on building your board with Baphomet. But anyway, that's gonna do it for Rune. Let's move on to the second Machina deck, which is arguably also the best Machina deck and arguably one of the best Machina decks, or not just Machina decks, one of the best decks in this set in general, which of course is the fan favorite Mono. Bonus points to you if you use your Mono leader from the Glory Finder bundle in this too. Mono Garnet Rebel is a big fan favorite.
Sorry, you were saying?
She is a 2 cost 3/2 Machina and Demon trait follower that can evolve for 1, but only if you have 5 Machina followers on your field. She helps you achieve that condition by allowing you to banish 2 Machina cards from your cemetery to summon an assembly droid token, which is the 1/1 token that we looked at earlier, but this can only be used once per turn. So you can already see that on her own, she's just a 3/2 that summons a token, right? So we're already committing 3 play points to her to evolve her, but when she evolves,
I'm ending this here and now.
she becomes a 5/4 with Storm, and if you pay 2 more play points and banish an Alpha Drive spell from your cemetery, she gives each Machina follower on your field +2/+2 and Rush, but this only activates once per turn, but the buff does include herself unlike Baphomet, so that means she's a 7/6 with Storm. Alpha Drive is a 1 cost spell with the Machina and Demon traits that has 2 very strong effects. The first one lets you select the Machina follower in your cemetery and add it back to your hand. The second one lets you choose a Mono in your cemetery and summon it. So that's really strong because, as you can probably tell, Mono basically costs 5 play points. She says she's a 2 cost, but you should read her as a 5 cost. Because if you're not evolving her and if you're not using the Alpha Drive removal effect, she's just a 5/4 with Storm on evolve basically. And you had to build up a whole board just to evolve her, so obviously you want to aim for that. But Alpha Drive lets you skip one of those play points, basically turning her into a 4 play point turn instead. And so the whole point of this deck is to build a board and make it stick so that on turn 5 you can just poof into your opponent's face with big damage. How are we doing that? Well, we have the good old reliable Mecha Gun Wielder to generate us an assembly droid. Sadly, it has to be an EX area. It's not like the cook that lets you put it to the field as well. It has to be to EX. We have Sanguine Core, which unfortunately is not a follower. Mono does care about Machina followers on board, but the core lets you look at top 2 to find a Machina added to your hand and put the rest to bottom. And you can also engage it and bury it to put an assembly droid into your EX, but you can only do that if you have 5 Machina cards in the cemetery. But it's a bit easier to achieve because this is of course Abyss we're talking about. One of the strongest early game cards in my opinion is Bone Drone. It's a 2-cost 2/2 that summons an assembly droid on last words. So when you're playing mono, usually your opponent will do everything they can to get rid of any followers you play in the early game. What makes this really good is that Bone Drone, when it gets popped, it still generates a Machina follower, which is the assembly droid. So the way you have to think about it is that on turn 5 when you play mono, she will generate 1 token. So that means that she herself is technically 2 followers. So you just need to make sure you have 3 stick on the board until turn 5. Otherwise, if they don't, then your mono gets delayed. So that means that you can spare 1 play point to play a follower from somewhere, whether it's from EX area or wherever. I mean, that depends on you. So just keep that in mind. Robo Goblin is here as well, of course. We don't care so much about the repair mode he generates. We care more about evolving him and making that assembly droid pop up instead because he summons it. So Robo Goblin on turn 3 is really good, or turn 2 going second is really good because of course we get to basically generate 2 followers from 1. Your optimal turn 3 plays, of course, you have Mecha Wing Angel, but Nicola, Forbidden Strength, on Fanfare just buries the top 2 cards of your deck, which isn't too bad because sometimes this will let you just mill your Alpha Drive, or maybe if you have Alpha Drive in hand, this will mill a mono that you can then revive. But if you evolve Nicola, he selects a Machina card that costs 2 or less in your cemetery and puts it to EX area, and then makes it cost 2 less to play this turn. So Nicola, of course, can revive mono herself. He can also revive Bone Drone. He can revive your Mecha Gun Wielder or your Robo Goblin, and he can also revive his own spell. Forbidden Art is a 2-cost spell that deals 4 damage to an enemy follower, but if Nicola is on the field, then it deals 6 damage instead. It's kind of like the Mistelina one, where it gets buffed to 6 damage, which, you know, is pretty impressive. So it's really good for taking out boards, and he pairs really well with Ennea. Ennea Amethyst Rebel is a 4-cost 2/2 that searches your deck for a Machina follower that costs 3 or less, summons it, and shuffles your deck, and on last word, she heals your leader too. So she also generates basically 2 followers from herself, and if you are going second and you search Nicola from this, then the Nicola evolves and he revives a 2-drop, then 1 Ennea gave you 3 followers. So if turn 1 you played a follower, turn 2 you played a follower, then each just generated 1 thing, and then turn 3 you played a Nicola which generated a follower. Obviously your opponent's trying to take them all out, and then turn 4 you play an Ennea that generates something, and then you play Nicola from that generates another thing. You kind of see how hard it is for your opponent to actually take out your early stuff before you put down the mono. Obviously if you have 4 followers remaining, you have to make sure not to board lock yourself and play the 5th, because then of course you're not going to be able to play the mono if you don't have anything to swing into. That's where soul conversion comes in handy, by the way. But then if you have 4 on board, you can just play the mono and not banish 2 to summon the assembly droid, right? You just buff up whatever you have on board, and then you basically just everything has +2/+2, and because they were played the previous turns, they can swing face. So overall you see how you have to be very aware of how you're playing into your mono turns. Make sure your board sticks, and then you're able to do a lot of damage. If you're missing any pieces though, that's where this deck falls apart. If you don't have your Alpha Drive, tough luck. You didn't draw your mono, tough luck. Ennea definitely helps to find your pieces, but until then you're basically going to be drawing cards from stuff like Soul Conversion, Sanguine Core. Techno Lord of course will give you that search. So I think this deck is definitely easier to play compared to Natura Sword, and I'd say it is one of the best candidates. I think from this set my top candidates for meta decks is Natura Sword, Machina Abyss, and Natura Forest. Together with Natura Dragon, I'd say those 4. But you can already see how this deck is really poorly matched into Tetra, because Tetra can just deal 1 damage to all these like things that spawn, right? She'll deal 2 to the Bone Drone and then 1 to the assembly droid that comes out of the Bone Drone, and it's like, well, what do I do now? So keep in mind that when playing mono, you do need to know your lines, of course, but you also need to know what are you going to do when your opponent takes out your stuff? How are you going to build your mono turns when you don't have anything on board? Because mono technically costs 5, so you're going to need those extra play points to put down the other 3 followers if you don't have anything on board already. Alpha Drive helps to deal with that, of course. Your optimal plays, though, I would say, is like turn 1 Mecha Gun Wielder, turn 2 Bone Drone, turn 3 Robo Goblin, or Nicola if you're going second. Turn 4, I think you Ennea whether you go first or second. want. And then if you have 3 things on board, you can just mono turn 5 immediately and get yourself a huge board. Because don't forget that Mono herself is a 7 storm attacker. If your Enya remained, now she's a 4/4. If your Nicola remained, even if he's not evolved, he's a 5/5. Your Robo Goblin is a 4/4. Your Bone Drone is a 4/4. Your tokens are 3/3s. Mono's giving rush to all of your followers. So even if the stuff that came on play the turn that you played them, Mono will still give them, you know, buffs and rush so they can trade into your opponent's wards and whatnot. So overall, I think the deck is very, very strong. Its ceiling is very high, but it does get targeted down in this meta quite a lot too. And last, and it pains me to say this, but unfortunately, for the time being, the least, it is going to be Machina Haven. Machina Haven gets way better after its next support that it gets in set 12, but for the time being, it definitely just has like its thing to do, and that's about it. Lemonia Flawed Saint is a 3-cost 3/2 that puts a repair mode into your EX when you play her, and she banishes a repair mode from your EX area not once per turn to reduce her evolve cost by 1. Her original evolve cost is 7, so if you banish 5 repair modes, it becomes 2, and when you do evolve her, she destroys each enemy follower on the field. So she's a 5/4 Themis Decree that only destroys your opponent's side of the board, and you can pay 0 play points to choose a Machina follower that costs 2 or less in your cemetery and summon it, but this only activates once per turn. I'd say the main one you want to summon is Robo Falcon, a 2-cost 1/3 with Storm that when it attacks puts a repair mode to your EX area, and if you already had 3 repair modes in your EX, then it gets +1 attack. So it's a 2/3 with Storm that you can just constantly keep reviving with your Lemonia, but if you evolve it, it's basically a 3/4 with Storm that on evolve also puts another repair mode into EX area. So this is also a good turn 2 going second play or turn 3 going first play. The general plan doesn't really change. You have a bunch of early repair mode generators like the Mecha Gun Wielder. Iron Knuckle Nun also puts a repair mode into EX area both on Fanfare and Last Words while having ward. Robo Goblin is also here. Augmentation Bestowal is probably quite a traumatic card for the app players, but not so much for evolve players. It lets you banish 2 repair modes from EX to search your deck for a Machina follower that costs 3 or less and summon it, which basically can search out your Lemonia. And if you banish 5 repair modes from EX, you can search your deck for a Machina follower that costs 6 or less and summon it and shuffle your deck. So that of course lets you search out your Techno Lord, which then can search out your other cards or deal damage or destroy stuff as usual. So it's basically an additional 3 copies of all of those cards. The other 3 costs, you have Marlone Light of Balance that isn't a Machina, so keep that in mind, but it does put a repair mode token into both players' EX area because I guess he do be pretty holy. And if you evolve him, he becomes a 4/4 that chooses an enemy follower that costs X or less in the field and destroys it, X equaling the number of cards in your EX area, so the cap is basically 5, which is still pretty good when you think about it. There's basically a 4 play point destroy a 5-cost or less follower. Father Refinement is a Machina trait, a 4/4 with 5 cost that has rush and puts 2 repair mode tokens into your EX area and recovers 2 play points, basically being a 3-cost 4/4. And because he has rush, you can strike, draw a card immediately, but if you have 5 repair modes in your EX, it draws 2 instead. So this deck doesn't really run out of resources as easily as some of the other decks. You can generally just like kind of like blow up your opponent's board constantly while healing yourself a bunch and then searching out your deck for a bunch of good things, and then Lemonium will just summon falcons all the time, and those falcons will just punch your opponent a bunch. What's also nice is that Ether of the White Wing does allow you to search out anything that is Haven that costs less than your maximum play points when you play her. So she can search out the Kaede if you need some emergency healing that we play as a 1-of here. Also searches out the other new card from this set, Lapis Glorious Seraph, which is a 5/3/7 with ward that at the start of your end phase lets you choose a card in your field and put a prayer counter on it and give your leader +2 defense, and when she would leave the field, you draw a card for every prayer counter that was on her. So usually in this deck you only put the prayer counters on her as a way to continuously heal yourself, draw a bunch of cards, and then just basically outstall your opponent. There's one really good generic card in this set too, which is the Marcotte, which is a 1/3 2-drop that has ward and draws a card, but if you have 5 cards in your EX, which this deck quite easily achieves, she lets you search for any card added to your hand instead of just blindly drawing. So I'd say the deck itself is pretty decent. You basically know what you're doing, you're healing a bunch, you're destroying your opponent's board a bunch, and your Lemonia is giving you your damage. But then aside from that, I do think it can struggle to close out games sometimes, so that's why we're playing the Ruby Falcon. Ruby Falcon is a 3-cost 3/3 with ward that you can pay 2 play points to give it Storm, and whenever any other follower you control with Storm or ward attacks, you deal 1 damage to each enemy leader, and this isn't once per turn. A lot of the things in this deck do carry ward or Storm, so the Robo Falcon of course adds another damage to this, the Iron Knuckle Nun or the Marcotte, they also add extra damage to this. Same goes for the Kaede and the Lapis as well as the Ether. On evolve, the Ruby Falcon also also deals 2 damage to enemy follower, which is also very nice. So generally speaking, for this deck, your optimal plays would be like turn 1 Mecha Gun Wielder, turn 2 Iron Knuckle Nun, turn 3 going first or turn 2 going second. You can Robo Falcon them as well for some early damage. Robo Goblin works too. Turn 3 you can also play Mecha Wing Angel or the Marlon. Turn 4 Marlon works as well. And then somewhere around turn 5 you're going to play your Limonium, because now you've generated repair modes. Basically turn 1, turn 2 your Iron Knuckle Nun probably gave you like 2 of them, and then on turn 3 and 4 you've generated at least 1 of each of those turns. Now you easily have 5, because also don't forget the Limonium also generates 1. Sometimes you have to use them to heal yourself just so you don't actually like get more than 5 in there. And then Limonium pops all of your repair modes and you evolve her, board wipe your opponent, Robo Falcon comes back out, and you get to keep bashing. And for some decks, getting board wipe does mean a huge tempo loss, so that does sometimes just win you games based on that too. So sometimes knowing when to keep your Limonium evolve is also very important. And that's going to do it for this very long competitive deck showcase. There's a lot of really powerful decks in this meta, and because of how quickly I went through the must-have cards, I really wanted to dig deep and talk about all the cards from this set in this video. I hope it was useful to you guys, and if you are getting into Evolve for the first time, or if you know friends that really love these decks in the app and now don't know maybe that these decks are out in Evolve, make sure to let them know and show them this video, because this is probably your best one-stop shop to learn about these decks. Obviously these deck lists will change over time as we go through the BCS season in English, and we'll see which ones actually come out on top. We do take a look at the BCS results and any other big events from both Japanese and English sides on the EX Area podcast, which is a Shadowverse Evolve podcast that me and Ignidius, one of the other Shadowverse Evolve English ambassadors, do on a monthly basis more or less. So make sure you check that out as well if you're curious to see how the meta evolves in the English edition. But with that, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe, and again, share this video with your friends that are interested in Natura or Machina in general, or are just curious to get into Shadowverse Evolve and need a good competitive resource. With that, that's gonna do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.